Hello everyone, it's Dave Bretthauer. I'm going to be bringing you a video today featuring some different Oxide ink techniques and using some of the latest sets from our holiday collection. I'm going to be using a piece of plain old cardstock. I've sized it to an A2 size card. So I've cut out a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white cardstock, and I'm just going to create a background on it. I'm putting Distress Oxide in Candied Apple all the way along the edge, and when I apply this, I'm going to use a circular motion with a sponge. I'm just going to keep layering and putting the color around the edge and making it nice and deep. Now I'm leaving the center part open because I'm going to put a separate color, picked raspberry, in the middle to lighten it up and make it blend out just a little. So now I'll use my Misty tool to help me with my stamping. I'm using the Poinsettia Delight set from Poppystamps. I'm going to put a couple of images right at the corners. So I'm kind of lining it up so that part of that image is going to be on the cardstock and part of it will be off. I want to sort of hit the opposite corners here. So I'm going to put that down, kind of trying to position it so that it sort of leaves a little bit of space in the middle because we're going to be putting a sentiment in the middle later. So just get that ready. I'm going to pull it back. I'm going to ink that up with some Versamark ink, just some plain old embossing kind of ink. And I'm going to be embossing that with white embossing powder. Now you want to make sure that your card is dry before you do this, otherwise your powder is going to stick everywhere. So give it a little bit, or you might try to heat set it before you do this embossing. Those Distress Oxides, they dry pretty quick, but you want to give it a little time before you do this embossing. So for this first card, I've kept it pretty simple. I'm just using a couple of images from that Poinsettia Delight set, just right at the edge. Now you can make this a lot more complicated if you wanted to, but for what I'm trying to show you, the painting portion of it, I think this will be fine, and it still is very effective just to put a couple of simple images on there. So I've gone ahead and started embossing the white embossing powder onto the cardstock. I want to make sure that I touch all the different areas, make sure that everything gets nice and heat set. And I've gone ahead and made some masks for what we're going to do next. So I stamped out one of the images onto a Post-it note, and I'm using that to mask that off as I add a few more leaves from the Poinsettia Delight set. By doing this, you can build up the size of the poinsettia so that it looks larger and much more full. I want those poinsettia leaves that are on top of the pink area to be red, so I've rubbed the Candied Apple ink pad onto a piece of plastic, and I've just taken a wet paintbrush and dipped into that ink, and I'm painting with it. And what that's going to do is darken those leaves over the pink area so it looks like it's been masked right into that middle area. And I just add the Joy outline die, which fits just perfectly in that open space that's left. This next card is a good illustration of one of my favorite ways to stamp. We're going to do a basic background at first. I'm just using picked raspberry again, and I'm going to do a very, very subtle fade across this piece of cardstock. Again, it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, just a piece of plain white cardstock. And I've faded halfway down with the picked raspberry, and then I'm going to pick up where that left off with spun sugar. Now, just like how I did on the very first project, I'm going to build up the design background a little bit more. This is what I really like about stamping. You can just keep adding on to things and really make a scene using several different elements. I'm going to do a quick masking technique. I'm just going to put a piece of Post-it note down where I think I'm going to be stamping. I'm not going to bother with cutting it out precisely. And I'll stamp it so that that stem doesn't go on top of that leaf. Then I'll adjust the Post-it note, stick it someplace else, and I'll put another bit of mistletoe so it's sort of coming out from underneath that poinsettia. So I'll do that just a couple times. I want to leave a little bit of open space towards the top of that area for what we're going to be doing next. And I'll emboss that with some plain old white embossing powder. Now what we're creating right now is actually the inside of the special card. So I'm going to use that Joy outline again to help me with this technique. The Joy outline has those center letters plus an outline that goes around those letters, and I'm going to use that to create a window on the front of a card. I've just folded a piece of 8.5 by 11 and cut it in half to give me a 4.25 by 5.5 top folding card. And that imagery background that we made is going to go inside so that you can see a joy on the front and just a little bit of pink showing through. And I'll just go ahead and glue the letters just in the right spot into the inside of the card, and then stamp out a quick little wishing you from the Tidings of Joy clear stamp set on the front. Now I wanted to include a simple ink blended background just to show off how easy it is to create something really beautiful with just a few shades of ink. So I'm using mowed lawn around the edge and crushed olives on the inside of this card, and I want to overlap them a little bit so that they blend nicely together. I've gone ahead and stamped and embossed the edges with the mistletoe and holly stamp set, and then I've gone over the middle with a little bit of broken china just to create a slight color variation. I've used the Joy outline again and added some glitter glue on all the berries to make this really pop. I really like the look of this simple ink blended background, so I did another one, basically the same technique, but I wanted to make a window in the front using the same outline technique that I used before. In this case, I used the Merry outline from Poppystamps, and you can see it has an outline, and then all those separate little letters can be situated right inside the outline. But I'm going to use this again to create a window in the front. I've cut through a piece of cardstock. I'm going to trim out the small little pieces because those would probably just fall off anyways when you're using it as a window. I'm going to go ahead and push that down and position all those letters in just the right spot, and I'll go ahead and glue those in place. You can see how nicely those letters contrast with that ink blended background, and when you open up the card, it reveals a really colorful inside. Now we all know it's really easy to blend colors that are next to each other on the color wheel really easily, but what happens when you start blending opposite colors? Well, you might get a little bit of mud, but I wanted to show you that sometimes that's okay. So I rubbed this card in 3 different spots with Candied Apple Distress Oxide ink, and then I filled in the middle parts with mowed lawn. I then took images from the Poinsettia Delight set, stamped and embossed them right onto those reddish areas. And you can see that some of those leaves extend out into that muddy part and into the green part even. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill those in using that painting technique where I've rubbed the Candied Apple ink pad onto a piece of plastic, and with a paintbrush I'm just filling in all those leaves. Now that red does this great thing, it changes a little bit deeper and adds a bit of dimension to the tips of those poinsettias. I just love it. Now the effect that you get once you've completed painting in all those leaves is that sponged area around the poinsettia almost becomes a shadow, so that it almost looks like you've masked it out on purpose because the leaves are red and deeper and there's a little bit of dimension there. Now all that's left is to add your sentiment in the middle with some glitter cardstock and vellum. Until next time, take care and thanks for stopping by.